Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
The Stock Movers Report, your roundup of companies making moves in the stock market, harnessing the power of Bloomberg data.
I'm Tim Stenevec along with Carol Masser. Let's take a look at some stocks on the move today. With us now is Bloomberg News senior reporter and deputy team leader for U.S. equities, Jess Menton. Jess, I hope you're looking at Intel.
Of course, the best performer
I'm just making sure.
in the S&P 500 and the NASDAQ 100. INTC is the ticker symbol. So up 23% at this point, so on pace for its best one-day percentage gain since October of 1987, so almost 4 decades ago here. And of course, if for people who remember, Intel actually got kicked out of the Dow last November. And usually when that happens, it can be a little bit of a contrarian indicator for some traders if you think of when Exxon or GE got kicked out of the Dow. But what's interesting about this is Nvidia actually replaced it in the Dow. But what happened here and why it's up so high today is actually Nvidia has a $5 billion investment with Intel. And so when you think about the AI story and the theme here, Nvidia and Intel said they would collaborate in developing chips for personal computers as well as data centers. So Intel, for context, specializes in chips known as those central processing units that serve as the brain of the computer. So Nvidia actually makes those graphics processing units. So that's more of kind of the powerful tasks like crunching a lot of data in that. So this is why it's important. So basically Nvidia throwing a lifeline to a one-time rival here. And the New York Times actually reporting earlier today that the Trump administration actually approached Nvidia 9 months ago and asked it to invest in Intel, according to 2 people familiar with the knowledge. So interesting context here when you look at a stock like this, but I have to point out Nvidia's stock, NVDA is the ticker, up about 4% right now.
Yeah, interesting. And I was just looking at Intel. It was a almost $75 stock back in 2000. Yes. It did go up as much to the level of like about 68 and change back in April of 2021. So it's still like half of that.
It's true. And you have the Dow trading around records right now, but then also Intel since November 8th of last year, whenever it got kicked out officially and Nvidia got added, it actually is outperforming Nvidia as well as the Dow in that time span of over 20%.
Right?
So some context there.
All right. Darden Restaurants, ticker DRI.
Now, looking at this stock down almost 7%, so on pace for its worst day since May of 2022. So this is a company that owns the parent company, so basically Olive Garden when it comes to those breadsticks, as well as Longhorn here. And formerly used to own Red Lobster, which I used to work at, but unfortunately Red Lobster has their own stuff. That was back in college, so many years ago.
I thought you were going to say something about Longhorn because you're a Texan.
No, surprise, actually. But they don't own that one anymore. Red Lobster has its own sort of bankruptcy issues that it was going through in recent years. But nonetheless,
maybe a turnaround. Maybe a turnaround.
That's true, but they're seeing some bright spots there with some of those endless shrimp specials that they tend to have in the fall, just for context in case people wanted to know. But besides all of that, so Darden actually, so I mentioned its stock down around 7% on pace for its worst day since May of 2022, but its first quarter comparable sales, unfortunately, at its core restaurant brand, so the 2 I mentioned, Olive Garden as well as Longhorn, those disappointed, so those profit expectations, trailing Wall Street expectations for the quarter. So really, unfortunately, food inflation, still feeling a lot of that at those companies. If you look at the A&R function in the terminal, 20 buys, 12 holds, and 2 sells for Darden.
All right, good to know, good to know. All right, Cracker Barrel.
Yes, so this, of course, I think you were out a couple weeks ago, Carol, when Tim and I were actually chatting about this, but this was back in
I thought you were going to say that you went to Cracker Barrel, had a bite to eat, hung out.
Well, in late August, they actually wiped out nearly $100 million in value after that rebrand that was very controversial was announced. Looking at its stock now, the ticker CBRL down 7% on pace for its worst day since September 2nd from earlier this year. The stock actually had been down around 6% this year through Wednesday's close, obviously after that gyrations there, but unfortunately it has a weak forecast that's been pressuring that stock. So Cracker Barrel, unfortunately cracking under the pressure when it came to that controversy.
What did they do? Did they get rid of the guy?
It was the uncle. Yes.
Isn't he called the old timer?
Uncle Herschel.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. They wanted to remove him.
I thought he was called the old timer.
So they got rid of him?
And he had the overalls. I thought they were just going to have it without it. And it really caused an uproar, unfortunately.
Seriously, with all that's going on in the world?
Right. And so critics were accusing the company of sort of erasing traditional elements that were tied to the brand. But unfortunately, when you look...
Companies change brands all the time.
Right, I know. And so they really kind of backed down for the pressure there after what it did to its stock. But so its revenue for fiscal 2026, which will run through next July, it's projected to be in the range of $3.35 billion to $3.45 billion. And unfortunately, analysts were expecting sales of $3.52 billion in that period. So unfortunately, that stock feeling some pressure once again today.
I think I said it last night. About 25% of the float is short. So
yes,
you can see the negative sentiment on this one in a big way.
The Stock Movers Report from Bloomberg Radio. Check back with us throughout the day for the latest roundup of companies making news on Wall Street. And for the latest market-moving headlines, listen to Bloomberg Radio live. Catch us on YouTube, Bloomberg.com, and on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app.